Donald Trump wins the election and return to the White House, the implications for global politics, economics and trade would be profound and multifaceted. The world is not static, it shifts and evolves based on leadership and policy. Trump's previous presidency was marked by a distinctive approach to international relations, and a second term would likely amplify and exacerbate the existing tensions, particularly with key players like China, the European Union, and Russia. Let's start with China. The relationship between the United States and China has been fraught with tension, and Trump's return would undoubtedly reignite that fire. His administration's policies were characterized by an aggressive stance against Chinese trade practices, and if he were to assume office again, we could expect a re-implementation or even an intensification of tariffs and sanctions. The trade war that marked his first term could see a resurgence, leading to a second wave of companies re-evaluating their manufacturing bases in China. Many U.S. firms and global companies would likely feel the pressure to relocate their operations to alternative countries like Vietnam, India, or Mexico. The fear of future disruptions would drive this exodus, as businesses seek to shield themselves from the unpredictability of U.S.-China relations. Moving on to the European Union, Trump's historical approach raised significant concerns regarding the U.S. commitment to NATO and collective defense. A second Trump administration could further challenge the unity of NATO and pressurize EU nations to increase their defense spending. This would create a precarious balancing act for European countries, which rely heavily on trade with both the US and China. Caught in the middle of renewed tensions, they would face complex choices about alignment and policy adjustments. The EU's economic stability could be jeopardized as it navigates the turbulent waters of US-China relations, potentially leading to a fracturing of alliances that have held firm for decades. Now, let's consider Russia. Trump's return might produce nuanced implications for US-Russia relations. While some speculate that he may adopt a less confrontational stance, the reality is that his policies would likely shift in response to the broader international landscape and pressure from allies. Any perceived leniency towards Russia could have repercussions for US-EU relations, particularly in the context of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Delicate dance would unfold, where Trump's actions could either exacerbate tensions or lead to unexpected alliances, depending on the circumstances. Southeast Asia and India could find themselves in a favorable position as companies shift production away from China. Trump's policies have historically favored reduced dependency on Chinese manufacturing, which could accelerate the growth of economies like Vietnam, Thailand, and India. India, in particular, might emerge as a favored alternative for manufacturing and tech investments, benefiting from Trump's previous relatively positive stance towards the country. As companies look to diversify their supply chains, these nations could see an influx of investment and economic activity, fundamentally altering their economic trajectories. The economic impact of a Trump presidency would be significant, particularly concerning the corporate exodus from China. The trade war during his previous term already prompted many companies to reconsider their manufacturing strategies, and a renewed Trump administration could exacerbate this trend. The technology sector would likely be at the forefront of this shift. Giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Google would further diversify their production to minimize dependency on China. Companies that manufacture hardware or rely on Chinese supply chains would prioritize investments in other countries, seeking to reduce risk and ensure stability. In the retail and manufacturing sectors, brands like Nike and Adidas, along with electronics companies reliant on Chinese components, might escalate their China Plus One strategies. This approach allows them to maintain some operations in China while establishing substantial facilities elsewhere, particularly in Vietnam, India, and Indonesia. The automotive and industrial sectors would also not be immune to these changes. Companies like General Motors and Ford, which depend heavily on Chinese factories, may consider shifting production to Mexico or other nearby countries to secure a more stable supply chain. The broader implications for global trade and the economy would be significant. Trump's policies would likely intensify the ongoing shift of global supply chains. While some realignment has already begun, another Trump term could cement these changes, with companies setting up China Plus strategies to avoid future disruptions. This shift could lead to a more fragmented global trading system, where countries are forced to reassess their dependencies and relationships. Domestically, the U.S. economy could see policies introduced to encourage companies to bring manufacturing back to American soil. While this could have positive effects on American jobs, it may also lead to increased costs for consumers due to higher manufacturing expenses in the U.S. compared to China. The balance between fostering domestic growth and managing consumer prices would become a contentious issue. Finally, global stock markets and investor confidence would likely experience volatility in the wake of a Trump victory. Uncertainty about trade policies, tariffs, and diplomatic relations would loom large, particularly for sectors with significant exposure to China. Companies perceived to benefit from domestic growth policies could see a stock boost, while those reliant on international trade might face increased scrutiny and pressure. In conclusion, a Trump victory would likely lead to a reconfiguration of global supply chains and significant adjustments in trade and diplomatic relations. The ripples of his policies would be felt across the globe, with countries like China, the EU, and emerging economies in Asia experiencing the most intense impacts. While the US may focus on domestic growth, the interconnectedness of the global economy means that the consequences of such a leadership change would resonate worldwide, reshaping the landscape of international relations for years to come.